So we have 4, A, B, C, D. D is the final state. A is the initial state. 0, 1 is the alphabet. Okay. And we need to fill this up to determine the NFA equivalent of this epsilon NFA. Okay. So let's start in considering 0 input. So let's start with A. Okay. So do we have, what is the epsilon transition for A? Epsilon closure rather is just A, since we don't have an epsilon going out of A. So if it's 0, it will go to B. So B, do we have an epsilon closure for B? Yes. Okay, it could reach B or C. Okay, so this will be the final path when A at 0. Okay, so we have BC for A at 0. Now let's proceed with A at 1. Epsilon closure for A is just A, but we don't have any path for A, so therefore dash. So now let's move on with B. So B at 0, again, the closure for B will be B and the next up, which is C. Okay, for B at 0, there's no path, so therefore dash. And for C, if it's 0, will loop within itself. And C closure is just C. Okay, so now let's move on with B at 1. So again, B, E closure is BC. And at B, if it encounters 1, it will just loop within itself. And we know that B closure is BC. Okay. And for C, if it's 1, it will just stay within itself. I'll go to D rather. Okay. If it's 1, it will go to D. Okay. Now let's proceed with C. So C, by the way, this is BCD, since BC union with D is BCD. Okay, let's go back to C. So closure of C is just C. And if it's 0, live within itself. And again, the closure is still C. And if it's 1, okay, it will go to D. Okay, closure of D is just D. Okay, how about D at 0? Nowhere to go, same as 0 and 1. Okay, since we don't have a specific path for 0 and 1 after D. So therefore, 0 and 1 will just be dash here. Okay, so now we're ready in creating the NFA since we already have this transition table for NFA. So let's start with A. So by the way, is there any final state rather, wherein a state could reach the final state through epsilon? Can B reach D through epsilon? Definitely no. It's just stop with on C. So there's no new final state. Okay. So no final state. So now let's draw. So we have force A, B, C, D, and D is still the only final state. So if A at 0, it will go both B, C. We don't have path for 1, so we're not going to consider it. For B, if it's 0, it will go to C. If it's 1, it will go to CD and loop within itself. Okay, and if it's C, if it's 0, loop within itself. If it's 1, it will go to D. And no path for 0 and 1 for D. So therefore, this is the final NFA for problem 2. Okay, so now let's move on with problem 3. So problem 3 involves three states, A, B, C, and we have C states as a final state. Okay, and we need to complete this table to create the NFA. Okay, so let's start with the transition. So by the way, we have three alphabets here, A, B, and C. Okay, so let's start with A, input with A state. So A state, what are the E closure of A state? So we have itself, B, and C. Okay, so at A, there's no path, so that's why it's dash dash. And for B, if it's A, it will go back to A. And based on our E closure, if it's A on A, it will could reach A or B or C. So that's why we have A, B, C path here. And if it's on C, if it's A, nowhere to go. Okay. So therefore, the final path for A at A is A, B, C. Okay. How about on B? So B closure will be just B. Okay. If it's A, it will go to A. This is the final or the next hop after B when it counters A. Since this is A, so therefore it could reach other state, which are A, B, C. So therefore, B at A will also go to other states, all states rather, A, B, C. Okay, now let's move on with C. So the C closure is just C. And if it's A, there's no path. So dash, dash. So therefore, no path for C at A. So now let's move on with B. Again, at A, we have three states that could be reached through epsilon. So let's start with A. If it's B, is there a path? Yes, going to B. Okay. And what is the closure of B? Is just B. Okay. So on B, okay. So if it's B, it will go to C. And the closure C is just C. And at C, if it's B, nowhere to go. Okay, now let's move on with B at B. So B at B, B closure is just B. And if it encounters a small b, it will go to C. And epsilon star of C is just C. Okay. And for C, okay. So epsilon closure again of C is just C and no path after C. And for C state, so again, no path for B. Okay, let's consider C input now. So again, let's start with A. So E closure R, A, B, C. So if it's C, it will go to C. Epsilon of C is just C. Okay, at B, if it's C, it will just loop with itself. And epsilon closure of B is just B. And for C, no path. So dash. So union of B, C will be the path for A at C, so which is BC. Okay, at B, okay, again, closure of B is just B. If it's C, will just loop within itself. Okay, so closure of B is just B. And at C, So by the way, that will be the path for B at C. And for C, there's no path for C. So this is the complete transition table for NFA. Now let's draw. But before we draw, let's define if there are new final state. Can A reach C through epsilon? Yes. So therefore, A will be a new final state when we convert this finite automaton to NFA. Okay. So now we have two final states, which are A and C, and also A is the initial state. Okay. In reference to this table, if it's A, it will go to BC and loop within itself. BC will go to the other states. So this will be the path. And for B, if it's A, it will go to all states. Okay. And if it's B, we'll just go to C. Okay. And if it's C, it will go to B. Okay. So this is the final NFA for this epsilon NFA. Okay. So that's it for this video lecture. See you on the next. Thank you.